In the remote wilderness of northern Montana, where silence seemed frozen in time and lonely roads cut through vast, untouched landscapes, Ethan Mitchell drove his weathered pickup truck along a seldom-traveled rural route. He was heading toward a property he had inherited from distant relatives, people he had never met, but whose legacy now provided an unexpected opportunity. Ethan had spent his entire life in Chicago, working at a marketing firm that had gradually consumed his identity. Over 15 years. The recent company merger had left him without a job, without a purpose, and with a growing sense that his life in the city had reached its end. The inheritance couldn't have come at a better time, a chance to evaluate not just the property, but also his future. The GPS signal had disappeared hours ago, leaving him with only paper maps and vague directions from the last gas station attendant he'd encountered. "You'll know it when you see it," the old man had said with a mysterious smile. Land like that has a way of calling to its owner. The January cold penetrated his truck, despite the heater working overtime. Around him, snow-covered pines stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with fresh powder from the previous night's storm. The Montana winter showed no mercy to outsiders, but Ethan welcomed the biting cold. It made him feel alive in a way 15 years behind a desk never had. As he navigated a particularly sharp curve flanked by towering pines, Ethan was forced to slam on his brakes. His truck skidded slightly on the icy road before coming to a complete stop. In the middle of the narrow road stood a massive grizzly bear, its fur a mixture of brown and silver that glistened in the winter light. "Jesus Christ," Ethan whispered, instinctively reaching for his phone to capture a photo. But something about the bear's posture made him pause. The animal wasn't simply crossing the road or foraging. It stood perfectly still, staring directly at Ethan's truck with an unnerving intentionality. The rational part of Ethan's brain told him to wait. Bears typically moved on after a few moments, especially if the vehicle remained still and non-threatening. But as the minutes ticked by, 5, then 10, the bear remained fixed in position, its eyes never leaving the truck. Curiosity gradually overwhelmed caution. Ethan had read that bears were usually in hibernation this time of year. Something about this situation felt profoundly wrong. Against every wilderness safety guideline he had ever read, he slowly opened his driver's side door and cautiously stepped out, keeping the truck's body between himself and the animal. The bitter cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath momentarily. But what he saw next stole it completely. Behind the bear, partially obscured from the road by the animal's massive body, sat a small child. A girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old, with long matted blonde hair. She wore only a thin flannel, shirt and jeans, no coat, no gloves, no hat. Completely inadequate protection against the brutal Montana winter. She sat cross-legged on the snow, staring vacantly into the distance, seemingly oblivious to both the freezing temperature and the enormous predator standing just feet away from her. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest. His first thought was that he was hallucinating. Perhaps the isolation of the long drive had affected his mind, but the scene before him remained unchanged no matter how many times he blinked. His second thought was to rush forward, to save the child from both the cold and the bear. But when he took a tentative step to the side, trying to get a clearer view, the grizzly let out a deep, rumbling growl that reverberated through the clearing. The message was unmistakable. "Do not approach." "Hey!" Ethan called out to the girl, his voice echoing strangely in the winter stillness. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" The child didn't respond. She didn't even look in his direction. The bear, however, shifted its massive weight, positioning itself more directly between Ethan and the girl. "This is insane," Ethan muttered to himself. He retreated to his truck, fumbling with his phone, desperately searching for a signal. Nothing. The nearest town, Pinecrest, was at least 40 miles back, and he hadn't passed another vehicle in over 2 hours. He assessed his options. Leaving to get help would mean abandoning the child in temperatures that could cause hypothermia in minutes. Trying to intervene directly risked provoking the bear. Waiting might mean watching a tragedy unfold before his eyes. With shaking hands, Ethan reached into his glove compartment and retrieved the flare gun he kept for emergencies. Not to threaten the bear, he couldn't bring himself to harm an animal that, despite all logic, seemed to be protecting rather than threatening the child, but perhaps to signal for help. Someone, somewhere might see it. He stepped out of the truck again, emergency blanket and flare gun in hand. Ethan noticed a subtle change. The bear had shifted its position slightly, turning its massive head to look back at the girl, then returning its gaze to Ethan. It repeated this motion 3 times, almost as if, "Are you trying to tell me something?" Ethan whispered incredulously. The bear took 1 step back from the girl, though it remained close enough to intercept any direct approach. Ethan's university anthropology courses had never covered interspecies communication, but something primordial in him recognized the invitation. Moving with deliberate slowness, he began to approach, emergency blanket extended in front of him like an offering. "I'm just going to help her," he said softly, unsure if he was trying to reassure the bear or himself. "She needs to get warm." Or the bear made no aggressive movements as Ethan drew closer, though its eyes tracked his every motion. When he was within 10 feet of the child, close enough to see her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, the bear let out another deep rumble. Not quite a growl, something more complex. Ethan stopped. The bear looked toward the tree line, then back at Ethan, then at the girl. "You want me to take her?" Ethan said, the realization dawning on him like the first rays of sunrise. "You've been waiting for someone to help her." The bear shifted its weight again, creating a narrow path between itself and the child. Moving with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb, Ethan approached the girl. Up close, the situation appeared even more dire. Her small body trembled uncontrollably, her eyes unfocused. Classic signs of hypothermia. With gentle movements, he wrapped the emergency blanket around her thin shoulders. "Hey there," he said softly. "My name's Ethan. I'm going to get you somewhere warm, okay?" The child gave no indication she had heard him. Her skin felt ice cold to the touch, her small fingers rigid, sending up a silent prayer to whatever force had brought him to this exact spot at this exact moment. Ethan carefully lifted the girl into his arms. She was frighteningly light, her body stiff but unresisting. As he turned back toward his truck, the girl safely cradled against his chest. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. The bear remained in place, watching them with those intelligent eyes. Once Ethan had placed the child in the passenger seat of his truck and secured her with the seatbelt, he looked back at the road. The bear was gone, vanished into the dense forest as silently as a ghost, leaving only massive paw prints in the snow as evidence it had ever been there at all. Ethan's hands trembled as he turned the heater to its maximum setting and pulled a spare coat from the back seat to place over the child. Her vacant expression hadn't changed, but her violent shivering had intensified, a good sign, according to the wilderness survival guide he'd read on the flight to Montana. The body fighting back was better than the body giving up. The nearest hospital would be in Pinecrest, the small town he had passed through hours earlier. As he carefully turned his truck around on the narrow road, Ethan couldn't help but look back at the spot where the bear had stood. Questions swirled in his mind like the snowflakes beginning to fall outside. Who was this child? What was she doing alone in the wilderness? And most disturbing of all, what had he just witnessed between the girl and the grizzly bear? The answers would have to wait. For now, his only priority was getting the child to safety. As he accelerated down the mountain road, the girl's head lolled against the window, her eyes finally closing in what Ethan hoped was simply exhaustion rather than something worse. The property assessment would have to wait. For the first time in 15 years, Ethan had found something that mattered more than his carefully constructed plans. The 40-mile drive back to Pinecrest was the longest journey of Ethan's life. Every few minutes he glanced at the small figure huddled under layers of emergency blankets and his spare coat. The girl's eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow but steady. The truck's heater blasted at maximum capacity, yet the chill that had settled into her small body seemed impervious to the artificial warmth. Pinecrest Community Hospital emerged through the swirling snow like a beacon of hope, a modest two-story building with a small emergency entrance illuminated by fluorescent lights. Ethan parked haphazardly near the ambulance bay and gathered the child into his arms, rushing through the automatic doors. "I need help!" His voice echoed through the quiet reception area. "She's hypothermic. I found her in the snow, miles from anywhere." The emergency room erupted into immediate action. A nurse with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair took the child from his arms while another staff member guided Ethan to a waiting area. The girl disappeared behind swinging doors, surrounded by medical personnel speaking in the clipped, efficient language of those accustomed to crisis. "Sir, I'm Dr. Sarah Bennett." A woman in her 50s approached him, clipboard in hand. "Can you tell me exactly where and how you found this child?" Ethan recounted his story, stumbling over the details that seemed too bizarre to be true. He mentioned the bear, but downplayed its behavior, concerned that the full truth would sound like the hallucination of a stressed city dweller, unused to wilderness realities. Dr. Bennett's expression remained neutral, though her eyes reflected a mixture of concern and skepticism. "And you saw no vehicle, no adult, nothing to indicate how she came to be there?" "Nothing," Ethan confirmed. "Just the bear and the girl. She was sitting in the snow wearing barely anything. It's a miracle. She survived at all." The doctor made a note. "We've contacted the county sheriff. They'll want to speak with you. In the meantime, would you be willing to provide your contact information? We may need to reach you as this situation develops." Ethan nodded, suddenly aware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. He had expected to spend the day surveying property lines and assessing the value of an unwanted inheritance. Instead, he had become entangled in something that defied explanation. Hours passed in the sterile waiting room. Ethan called the real estate agent he was supposed to meet, explaining that an emergency had arisen. The woman was understanding, rescheduling their appointment for the following day. Late in the evening, Dr. Bennett returned, accompanied by a tall man in a sheriff's uniform. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Sheriff James Calloway," she introduced. "The girl is stable. She's suffering from moderate hypothermia, but we've managed to raise her core temperature. Physically, she should recover." "Completely. Thank God," Ethan breathed. "However," the doctor continued, her tone shifting subtly, "we've encountered some unusual circumstances. The child hasn't spoken a single word since arriving. She's not catatonic. She responds to physical stimuli and follows simple instructions with her eyes, but she won't or can't speak." Sheriff Calloway stepped forward. "Mr. Mitchell, we've checked with every law enforcement agency in a 200-mile radius. There are no reports of missing children." Matching her description, no Amber Alerts, no custody disputes, nothing. "It's as if this child doesn't exist in any official capacity." "That's impossible," Ethan said. "She's what, 6 or 7 years old? Someone must be looking for her." 6, according to Dr. Bennett's estimate, the sheriff confirmed. "And you would think so, yes. But so far we've found nothing. No missing persons report, no concerned family members, nothing." "What happens to her now?" Ethan asked, surprised by how personally invested he felt in the answer. "We'll continue medical treatment while we investigate," Dr. Bennett said. "Child Protective Services has been notified, but their representative won't arrive until tomorrow, due to the weather. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the day was fading, leaving bone-deep fatigue in its wake. "Can I see her?" Dr. Bennett hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. "She's sleeping now, but sometimes a familiar face, even one she's only seen briefly, can be comforting." The hospital room was dimly lit. The only sounds, the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the soft whoosh of the heating system. The girl looked impossibly small in the adult-sized bed. Her matted blonde hair spread across the white pillow. Some of the color had returned to her cheeks, but the vacant expression remained even in sleep. Ethan stood awkwardly by the bed, unsure of his role in this unfolding mystery. He had saved her life, that much was certain, but what responsibility, if any, did that create between them? "We'd like you to stay in town for a few days," Sheriff Calloway said from the doorway. "Once she's more responsive, she might recognize you, which could help establish trust, and we'll need your formal statement about where exactly you found her." Ethan nodded, already mentally extending his stay at the Pine Ridge Motel. The property assessment could wait. Something about this child's story, or lack thereof, had hooked itself deep into his consciousness. The next morning brought heavy snowfall and a revelation. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, he found Dr. Bennett standing outside the girl's room, a peculiar expression on her face. "She's drawing," the doctor said by way of greeting. "Hasn't said a word, but when the nurse brought her breakfast, she pointed at the notepad we use for patient notes. Since then, she's been drawing continuously, the same images over and over." Inside the room, the girl sat cross-legged on the bed, hunched over a notepad, crayon moving with intense focus. She didn't look up when they entered, completely absorbed in her work. Several completed drawings were spread across the blanket. Ethan picked one up. It depicted a rustic cabin in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. In the foreground stood a man wearing what appeared to be a wide-brimmed hat, and beside him, unmistakably, a large bear. "They're all like this," Dr. Bennett said quietly. "The cabin, the man, the bear. Sometimes she adds herself to the picture, but the basic elements never change." Ethan studied the drawing more carefully. The girl had captured something essential about the bear, not just its size, but something in the eyes, an intelligence that echoed what he had witnessed on the snowy road. Has she indicated who the man might be? "A father? Relative?" Ethan asked. "Not directly. But watch this." Dr. Bennett gently took the drawing from Ethan and approached the bed. "Sweetie, is this your home?" she asked, pointing to the cabin. The girl nodded without looking up, continuing her drawing. "And is this man your father?" The doctor pointed to the figure in the hat. The girl paused, considering the question. Then she shook her head slowly. "But he took care of you? He was kind to you?" A nod this time, more definitive. "And the bear?" Dr. Bennett's voice contained a hint of disbelief, even as she asked the question. "Was the bear your friend?" The girl looked up then, making direct eye contact with the doctor for the first time. Her blue eyes were clear and unexpectedly intense. She nodded once, emphatically, before returning to her drawing. Sheriff Calloway had joined them, watching the interaction from the doorway. "It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen," he said softly. "We found fibers from grizzly fur on her clothing. Tests confirmed it. By all logic, that bear should have—" He glanced at the child and left the sentence unfinished. Ethan remembered the bear's strange behavior, how it had seemed to deliberately keep itself between the girl and any potential threat, while simultaneously trying to communicate that the child needed help. "I know this sounds crazy," Ethan said hesitantly, "but what if the bear was actually protecting her? What if it was waiting for someone to come along and help?" The sheriff and doctor exchanged glances that suggested they were questioning his mental state. "Bears are territorial predators, Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Bennett said gently. They don't form bonds with humans, and they certainly don't act as guardians for lost children. Whatever you witnessed was likely something else. Perhaps the bear was distracted by another food source or temporarily confused by an unfamiliar situation. But Ethan wasn't convinced. The bear's behavior had been too deliberate, too intelligent. And now, seeing the girl's drawings, the same bear depicted with the same unusual attention to the eyes, he couldn't dismiss the connection as coincidence. "I'd like to try something," he said suddenly, "if you'll allow it." The doctor looked skeptical, but nodded her permission. Ethan approached the bed slowly, careful not to startle the child. "Hi there," he said softly. "Do you remember me, from yesterday on the road?" The girl's crayon paused. Mid-stroke, slowly, she raised her head, studying Ethan's face with careful consideration. Then, to everyone's surprise, she reached for a fresh page in the notepad and began a new drawing. This time, she sketched a truck on a snowy road, a bear standing guard, and a man, recognizably Ethan, approaching with something in his hands that looked like a blanket. "She remembers," Dr. Bennett whispered. "This is the first variation in her drawing pattern since she started." Ethan felt a strange connection forming between himself and this mysterious child. He had been the one to find her, to bring her to safety, and now it seemed he was becoming part of her story, whatever that story might be. "I think," he said slowly, "that I need to find this cabin." Sheriff Calloway regarded Ethan with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant admiration. "You realize what you're suggesting is both dangerous and potentially illegal? We can't just have civilians wandering into the wilderness based on a child's drawings." "I understand your concern," Ethan replied, his gaze still fixed on the girl's artwork. "But something tells me these drawings are the only clue we have. And I'm the only one who knows exactly where I found her." The sheriff exchanged glances with Dr. Bennett, who gave a subtle nod. "I suppose we could organize a search party," Calloway conceded. "Though with this weather, we'd need to wait for the storm to pass." Ethan shook his head. "By then, any traces could be completely covered by snow. I'll go today. Just give me a detailed map of the area." The conversation moved to the hospital corridor, away from the girl's attentive ears. Dr. Bennett pulled Ethan aside while the sheriff made a phone call. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to be frank with you," she said, lowering her voice. "This child's case is unlike anything I've encountered in 30 years of medicine. Her core temperature when you brought her in was so low that she should have suffered permanent damage, yet her recovery has been remarkable. And there's something else." She hesitated, as if weighing professional caution against the need to share crucial information. "When we examined her, we found unusual scarring on her arms and legs, old injuries, long healed. Some appear to be from animal claws, others from what might have been a severe accident. If this child has been living in the wilderness, it wasn't just for a few days." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. "How long are we talking about?" "Years, potentially. Her muscle development, calluses, adaptation to cold. These suggest long-term exposure to harsh conditions. And there's more." Dr. Bennett lowered her voice further. "Her blood work shows unusual antibodies and elevated levels of certain hormones typically associated with hibernation in mammals." Hibernation in a human child. Ethan couldn't hide his disbelief. Not hibernation exactly, but similar adaptive mechanisms. The human body can develop remarkable survival strategies under extreme conditions. She straightened her lab coat. "I'm telling you this because if you're determined to look for answers, you should understand that whatever you find might defy conventional explanation." Sheriff Calloway returned, map in hand. "My deputy's bringing a snowmobile for you. I've marked the Forest Service roads and ranger stations, but I want hourly radio check-ins, and if we don't hear from you by sunset, we're sending in search and rescue. Is that clear?" Ethan nodded, studying the map. The area where he had found the girl was near the boundary of what appeared to be national forest land, remote, largely unexplored by casual hikers. An hour later, bundled in borrowed winter gear and equipped with emergency supplies, Ethan set out on the sheriff's snowmobile. The deputy had given him a crash course in operation and safety, emphasizing the radio's importance. The snowfall had lightened, though heavy clouds threatened more to come. Retracing his route was easier than expected. The memory of the encounter had burned itself into his mind. Each landmark, each turn in the road, standing out with unusual clarity. When he reached the spot where he had found the girl, Ethan cut the snowmobile's engine and stood in the sudden silence. Fresh snow had begun covering the bear's tracks, but the massive paw prints were still faintly visible, leading from the road into the thick pine forest. Ethan stared at the trail, knowing what common sense dictated: follow human protocol, call in his location, wait for backup. Instead, he radioed the sheriff with his coordinates, shouldered his backpack, and began following the bear tracks into the wilderness. The forest closed around him like a living entity, branches heavy with snow, creating a cathedral-like stillness. The temperature seemed to drop with each step away from the road as the canopy thickened overhead. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the disappearing trail, using a fallen branch to mark his own path for the return journey. He had traveled perhaps a mile when he noticed something strange, a second set of tracks occasionally appearing alongside the bear's. Smaller, more delicate impressions that could only have been made by a child. "My God," he whispered, crouching to examine the overlapping trails. They were traveling together. The intermingled tracks continued deeper into the forest, eventually leading to a small, frozen creek. Here, Ethan lost the trail momentarily before spotting where both sets emerged on the opposite bank. The creek wasn't wide, but jumping it with his heavy winter boots required careful footing. On the other side, the forest began to thin slightly, giving way to what appeared to be a small, natural clearing ahead. As Ethan approached, his heart began to pound. Through the trees he could make out a dark shape, too angular to be natural, too weathered to be recent. A cabin. Not the picturesque log home of wilderness calendars, but a rough, hand-built structure that had clearly withstood many Montana winters. Its roof sagged slightly on one side, and what might once have been a small porch had partly collapsed. Most telling was the west-facing wall, blackened and partially destroyed, with charred timbers exposed to the elements. Ethan approached cautiously, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the bear or human occupation. The cabin appeared abandoned. Snow drifted against its walls undisturbed by recent footprints. The door hung partially open, its lower hinge broken. "Hello?" he called out, knowing it was unlikely anyone would answer, but unable to shake the feeling that he was being watched. "Is anyone here?" Only the whisper of wind through pine needles responded. With growing trepidation, Ethan pushed the damaged door open wider and stepped inside. The cabin's interior was a single room, perhaps 20 feet square. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and filled with old ashes. A rough-hewn table stood in what must have been the kitchen area, a single chair beside it. Against another wall was a simple bed frame, its mattress long gone, and beside it something that made Ethan's breath catch. A smaller bed, child-sized, crafted from the same rough wood. 2 beds, one large, one small, just like the drawings. The cabin had been abandoned in haste. Cooking utensils remained on shelves, books stacked on a crude side table, clothing hanging from pegs on the wall. But everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, and near the burned section, water damage from snow melting through the compromised roof. Ethan moved carefully through the space, examining but not disturbing the remnants of whoever had lived here. On the table, he found a leather-bound journal, its pages warped from moisture. Opening it gingerly, he discovered tightly packed handwriting, dates spanning back 8 years. The first entry he could read clearly was dated April the 17th, 2016. Found her again by the creek today. Third time this week. She's getting bolder, coming closer to the cabin. Still don't know where she belongs or how she survives out here. No tracks but hers and the bear's. It's like they appear from nowhere. The ranger station hasn't reported any missing children, and I haven't told them what I've seen. Who would believe me? Ethan flipped forward several pages. November 9th, 2016. Winter closing in fast. Found her half frozen by the old trapper's line. No sign of the bear. Couldn't leave her this time. Brought her back to the cabin. She doesn't speak, doesn't cry. Ate like she was starving. Fell asleep by the fire with her fingers clutched around my old hunting knife. What kind of child finds comfort in a blade? More entries followed, documenting a strange, unfolding relationship between the journal's author, the child, and eventually, the bear. According to the writings, the bear had appeared outside the cabin 3 days after the man took the girl in, pawing at the door until the child ran to open it, showing no fear of the massive predator. The final legible entry was dated June 15th, 2022. She's changing. I don't know if it's my imagination, but sometimes, when I look at her eyes, I see something ancient looking back. Something that understands the wilderness in ways I never will. The rangers came by again yesterday, asked more questions about smoke from my chimney during off-seasons. They know something's not right. Said they'd be back with papers. We'll be gone by then, the three of us. She knows a place deeper in the mountains where they won't find us, where no one will find us. The journal ended abruptly, the remaining pages too water-damaged to decipher. Ethan set it down, his mind racing to process what he'd read. He continued his exploration of the cabin, finding children's drawings tucked into a wooden crate, crude representations of the same images the girl still created. The cabin, the man, the bear. In a small metal box beneath the larger bed, Ethan found what he had been hoping for: photographs. Most were too faded or damaged to make out clearly, but one remained relatively intact. It showed a bearded man in his 50s wearing a wide-brimmed hat, standing beside a young blonde girl. They were positioned in front of the cabin, which appeared newly built in the image. The girl's face was partially turned away from the camera, but her profile was unmistakable, the same child now recovering in Pinecrest Hospital. Most surprising was the date stamp in the corner of the photograph, April 2017. Almost 8 years ago. Ethan sank onto the single chair, the photograph trembling in his hands. If this was accurate, the girl couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old when she first came to this cabin. Yet the child he had found appeared to be about 6 or 7. Either the date was wrong or something about her development had been drastically altered by her environment. A subtle sound from outside snapped Ethan back to the present, the soft crunch of snow under weight. He rose quickly, tucking the photograph into his pocket and moving to the doorway. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the bear. The massive grizzly regarded him with the same intelligent gaze Ethan remembered from their first encounter. It made no aggressive move, simply watching as Ethan slowly emerged from the cabin. "You led me here," Ethan said softly, the absurdity of speaking to a wild animal overshadowed by the growing certainty that this was no ordinary bear. "You wanted me to find this place." The bear shifted its weight, massive head turning toward the burned section of the cabin, then back to Ethan. The message seemed clear. Look closer at the damage. Heart pounding, Ethan approached the charred wall. What he had initially taken for fire damage now revealed itself as something more complex. The burn pattern was concentrated and intense in specific areas, not the spreading pattern typical of an accidental fire. And embedded in the charred wood, barely visible, were metal fragments. "This wasn't an accident," Ethan whispered. "Someone tried to—" He couldn't complete the thought. When he turned back, the bear was gone, vanished into the forest as silently as it had appeared at the roadside. Ethan stood alone in the clearing, the weight of all he had discovered pressing down on him like the snow-laden branches overhead. The radio at his hip crackled to life, Sheriff Calloway demanding his hourly check-in. With one last look at the abandoned cabin, Ethan pressed the transmit button. "Sheriff, I found it. The cabin from her drawings, and you're going to want to see this." The sheriff's investigation team arrived within hours, transforming the peaceful clearing into a hive of activity. Yellow crime scene tape created a perimeter around the cabin, while forensic specialists photographed and catalogued every detail. Ethan watched from a distance, the photograph from the cabin secure in his pocket. He had shown it to Sheriff Calloway, but felt a strange reluctance to surrender it completely. "Mr. Mitchell," the sheriff approached, his breath visible in the cold air. "My team found something I think you should see." Inside the cabin, an investigator had pulled up several floorboards near the damaged wall, revealing a small hidden compartment beneath. From this space, they had retrieved a weatherproof case containing documents, birth certificates, immunization records, newspaper clippings, and a letter in a sealed envelope. The man was Thomas Randall, Sheriff Calloway explained, consulting. His notes: former wildlife biologist with the Forest Service, disappeared about 8 years ago after being suspected of tampering with research data. Everyone assumed he'd left the state. "And the girl?" Ethan asked, his eyes fixed on the documents spread across the table. The sheriff hesitated. "That's where it gets complicated. According to these records, her name is Lily Winters. She was reported missing from a campsite in Glacier National Park in 2015. She was 2 years old at the time." 2015? Ethan's mind raced with calculations. "But that would make her 12, the sheriff finished. "Not 6 or 7 as we estimated." Dr. Bennett, who had joined the investigation team at the cabin, shook her head in disbelief. "That's not possible. Her physical development clearly indicates a child of 6 or 7, unless..." "Unless what?" Ethan prompted. "Unless something in her environment dramatically altered her developmental processes." The doctor chose her words carefully. "Extreme conditions can affect human physiology in ways we don't fully understand. Extended periods of cold, unusual dietary factors, stress responses, theoretically, they could slow physical development." Sheriff Calloway turned his attention to the letter, carefully opening the sealed envelope with gloved hands. The paper inside was covered with the same handwriting as the journal Ethan had found. "To whoever finds this," the sheriff read aloud. "If you're reading this, we've had to leave our home. My name is Thomas Randall. The child with me is Lily Winters. I did not abduct her, as the authorities believe. I found her in the wilderness in 2015, already in the company of the bear. I spent months observing them before intervening, convinced she would not survive another winter. When I finally brought her to the cabin, the bear followed. I cannot explain the connection between them. It defies everything I learned in 20 years of wildlife research." The sheriff paused, glancing at his audience before continuing. "I tried to return her to civilization once, 6 months after. Finding her, drove her to the ranger station, intending to tell them everything. She became so violently ill on the approach to town that I feared for her life. Turned back immediately. Whatever happened to her in the year before I found her changed her fundamentally. She belongs to the wilderness now, as does the bear. And so, it seems, do I." The letter continued, describing Randall's efforts to give the child a normal life. Within the confines of their isolated existence, he had taught her to read and write, though she rarely spoke. He documented her unusual resilience to cold, her ability to communicate with the bear in ways that seemed impossible, and his growing concern about people from the forestry department becoming suspicious of his continued presence in the wilderness. The final paragraph was the most disturbing. "Someone found us. 3 men with government credentials, but no identification came to the cabin last week while Lily and the bear were by the creek. They asked questions about the subject and the specimen. They mentioned a research facility. When I refused to discuss Lily, they became threatening, said they'd return with authorization. I don't know who they represent, but their interest in Lily and the bear was not benevolent. If you find this letter after we've gone, do not try to find us. But if they have taken her, God help whoever stands in my way to get her back. A heavy silence fell over the cabin as the sheriff finished reading. The implications of Randall's letter hung in the air like the dust motes, illuminated by the investigators' flashlights. The fire, Ethan said finally. You said there were metal fragments in the burn pattern. What if those men came back? Sheriff Calloway nodded grimly. Already thought of that. Sent the fragments to the state lab for analysis. Preliminary assessment suggests incendiary devices, professional grade. And Randall, any sign of him? Ethan asked, though he suspected the answer. Nothing conclusive yet. There's a disturbed area behind the cabin that my deputy is examining. Could be nothing. The sheriff's tone suggested he believed otherwise. Dr. Bennett interjected, but the girl survived. Somehow she survived whatever happened here. The bear, Ethan said simply. The bear protected her, got her away from the cabin during the attack, kept her alive in the wilderness, and finally brought her to the road where someone might find her. The assembled investigators exchanged glances that ranged from skepticism to uncomfortable consideration of the possibility. No one offered an alternative explanation. Darkness was falling by the time they returned to Pinecrest. Ethan went directly to the hospital, drawn by a need to see the girl, Lily, with this new understanding of her history. He found her room transformed. Child Protective Services had brought toys, books, and new clothes. A social worker sat beside the bed, gently encouraging Lily to choose a stuffed animal from an assortment arranged on the blanket. Lily ignored the offerings, focused instead on a new drawing. When she saw Ethan in the doorway, her hand stilled. For a long moment they regarded each other in silence. "You found it," she said suddenly, her voice soft but clear. The social worker gasped. That's the first thing she's said since arriving. Ethan approached the bed slowly. "Yes, Lily, I found the cabin." The girl's eyes widened at the sound of her name. "You know me? I know your name is Lily Winters, and I know about Thomas Randall, the man who took care of you, and about your friend, the bear." Lily considered this information, her small face serious. "Tom is gone," she said finally. "He protected me from the bad men, but they hurt him. He told me to run and not look back." The social worker was frantically taking notes, while Dr. Bennett, who had entered silently behind Ethan, watched with professional intensity. "Miska took care of me after," Lily continued. "That's what Tom called the bear. Miska kept me warm and found food. She taught me to listen to the forest." "Lily," Dr. Bennett said gently, "how did you and Miska end up by the road where Mr. Mitchell found you?" The girl looked down at her drawing, the now familiar cabin, but this time with flames engulfing one wall. "Miska said it was time to go back, that I needed people again. She waited until the right person came." Her gaze returned to Ethan. "She chose you." "Why me?" Ethan asked, awareness prickling along his spine. "Because you listen," Lily said simply. "Most people just hear, but they don't listen. You heard Miska when she told you I needed help." In the following days, the investigation gathered momentum. Forensic evidence confirmed that Thomas Randall had indeed been at the cabin during what appeared to be an orchestrated attack. The metal fragments matched components used in specialized incendiary devices with military applications. Most disturbing were traces of a tranquilizer compound found in a broken dart near the cabin's rear exit, the kind used to subdue large mammals. Sheriff Calloway expanded the investigation, bringing in federal authorities despite his obvious reluctance to surrender control of the case. Records were requisitioned from multiple agencies, revealing a classified research initiative focused on interspecies communication and survival adaptations in extreme environments. Thomas Randall's name appeared in early documents as a consultant before his disappearance. Throughout these developments, Lily began to speak more frequently, though only to Ethan and, occasionally, Dr. Bennett. Her vocabulary was limited but precise, reflecting the isolated education Randall had provided. Her understanding of wildlife and survival techniques astonished the specialists brought in to evaluate her. Physical examinations confirmed Dr. Bennett's suspicions about Lily's unusual physiology. Her body temperature naturally ran several degrees below normal. Her metabolic processes showed adaptations typically seen in cold climate mammals, including the ability to drastically reduce energy consumption during periods of rest. Most remarkably, her blood contained compounds previously undocumented in humans, elements that appeared to facilitate remarkable tissue regeneration and cold resistance. As media interest in the case grew, Child Protective Services moved to place Lily in a specialized care facility in Helena. The separation from her familiar surroundings triggered the first emotional outburst since her rescue, a wordless keening that continued until she exhausted herself into unconsciousness. Ethan, who had extended his stay in Pinecrest indefinitely, felt the pull of obligation transforming into something deeper. The property he had come to evaluate remained unvisited, its potential value insignificant compared to the human drama unfolding around him. The night before Lily was scheduled to be transferred, Ethan sat beside her hospital bed, reading from a book of wilderness tales he had found in the town's small bookstore. She listened with uncharacteristic restlessness, her eyes repeatedly drifting to the window where a late February snowstorm obscured the view. "She won't find me there," Lily said suddenly, interrupting the story. "Who won't find you?" "Miska. She watches the hospital. She knows I'm here." Lily's fingers twisted in the blanket. "But she won't be able to find me in the city." Ethan set the book aside. "Lily, the people in Helena want to help you. They have doctors and teachers who can give you what you need." The girl fixed him with a gaze far older than her apparent years. "They want to study me, like the bad men wanted to. I heard the doctors talking when they thought I was asleep." A chill ran through Ethan as he recalled phrases from recent conversations with the specialists: unique research opportunity, unprecedented adaptive mechanisms, potential applications. He had dismissed them as scientific enthusiasm, but through Lily's eyes, the language took on a more sinister tone. That night, Ethan made the most impulsive decision of his life. The property he had inherited was remote but habitable, with a sturdy ranch house and outbuildings. It bordered national forest land, offering both civilization's comforts and wilderness access. With his background in marketing and business, he could work remotely while providing Lily with a stable environment, one that honored both her human needs and her unique connection to the natural world. The legal battle was intense but briefer than anticipated. Dr. Bennett's testimony regarding Lily's special needs and the potential trauma of institutional placement carried significant weight. Sheriff Calloway, to everyone's surprise, supported Ethan's petition for temporary guardianship, citing his own concerns about certain federal agencies' interest in the case. By early spring, Ethan and Lily had settled into the ranch house. A tutor came 3 times weekly to assess Lily's education and develop a specialized curriculum. Dr. Bennett made regular visits to monitor her health and development. The property's boundaries were secured with state-of-the-art systems that protected privacy while recording any unusual activity. The first time Lily ventured alone into the forest edge behind the house, Ethan watched from the porch, heart in his throat. She moved with confidence through the trees, following some inner compass he couldn't comprehend. When she returned, hours later, her face held a serene expression he hadn't seen before. "Miska found me," she said simply, accepting the warm cocoa he offered. "She says this place is good. We can stay." Ethan never saw the bear himself, though occasionally he found massive paw prints at the forest's edge, evidence of a watchful presence just beyond human sight. The federal investigation into the cabin incident continued, but public interest waned as more sensational stories captured the media's attention. Local residents, initially curious about the city man and his unusual ward, gradually accepted them as part of the community's fabric. One evening in late autumn, as the first snow dusted the mountains, Ethan sat on the porch, reviewing designs for an addition to the house. A studio space where Lily could develop her artistic talents, which had blossomed beyond simple cabin drawings into complex wilderness landscapes. Lily emerged from the forest, cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "I remembered something today," she said, settling beside him on the porch swing. "Something from before Tom found me." Ethan set aside his tablet, giving her his full attention. These rare glimpses into her earlier memories were precious, helping to construct the puzzle of her past. "I was little, in a tent with my parents. There was a storm, and the river rose too fast. My mother put me on a fallen tree trunk, but the water took her away." Lily spoke without visible emotion, as if recounting a story that had happened to someone else. The tree floated for a long time. When it stopped, Miska was there. She kept me warm that first night, and every night after. The simplicity of her account belied its significance. This was the first time she had mentioned her birth parents or explained how she had initially encountered the bear. "Thank you for telling me," Ethan said softly, understanding the trust this disclosure represented. Lily nodded, her gaze fixed on the darkening tree line. "Tom used to say that some people belong to the wilderness, even if they start in cities. He said he recognized it in me right away." She turned to Ethan, her eyes reflecting the porch light. "Miska says she recognized it in you too. That's why she chose you on the road that day." Ethan felt a profound sense of coming full circle, from the stressed marketing executive who had driven that remote Montana road seeking only a property assessment to a man who had found purpose in the most unexpected circumstances. "Do you ever miss the city?" Lily asked suddenly. Ethan considered the question carefully. "I miss certain conveniences, some restaurants, the energy of crowds sometimes." He smiled. "But no, I don't miss the life I had there. This feels more authentic." Lily nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Tom wrote in his journal that people spend their whole lives looking for where they truly belong. He said most never find it." "And we did?" Ethan asked, though he already knew her answer. "We did," she confirmed, pulling her sweater tighter against the evening chill. "The wilderness showed us both the way home." As darkness settled over the Montana landscape, the distant call of a wolf pack echoed through the valley. Lily tilted her head, listening with that peculiar intensity that reminded Ethan of how much about her remained beyond ordinary understanding. And from the forest's edge came another sound, the soft huffing of a large animal moving through the underbrush, watchful and protective. Ethan didn't need to see Miska to know she was there, maintaining her vigil over the strange family that had formed against all odds and expectations. The bear, the girl, and the man who had once belonged to the city but now found himself exactly where he was meant to be, at the boundary between wilderness and civilization, where the most profound transformations occur. Some mysteries, Ethan had learned, weren't meant to be solved, but simply accepted, like the connection between a child and a bear, like the calling that had drawn him to this remote corner of Montana at precisely the right moment, like the quiet certainty that had replaced his once restless ambition. The porch light illuminated. Their small circle of comfort while beyond it, the vast wilderness stretched into darkness, holding its secrets close. Secrets that Lily understood and that Ethan was slowly learning to hear, one whisper at a time. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Lily's extraordinary journey has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. The profound connection between a child of the wilderness, a protective bear, and a man searching for meaning reminds us that sometimes our true purpose finds us in the most unexpected ways. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the mysterious bonds between humans and the natural world. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring unique narratives that explore life's complexity and the extraordinary connections that define our humanity. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to know which moment from Ethan and Lily's story resonated with you the most. And remember, sometimes the wilderness calls to those who are ready to listen. Perhaps there's a part of your own story waiting to be discovered in places you've never thought to look. Stay tuned for our